All right, guys. I'm gonna try to go through these as quickly as I possibly can, but we're probably going to get 2 or 3 different lectures to get through this. One of the things I wanted to talk about is just right now we're in the middle of the coronavirus economic downfall. This morning we had a great example of fiscal policy. The government just, or the morning that I'm recording this, of course, the government just passed a $2 trillion relief stimulus bill to try to combat some of the economic issues that we're seeing. All right. So fiscal policy is our government actions. All right. And I used this analogy before, right? So the car analogy is if the economy is like a car, you drive too fast, it's not sustainable. If you drive too slow, you're not doing well, right? You got high unemployment. If you're going about 70 miles per hour, that's sustainable. So you want to be at that full employment range, right? And then you can see some of the other analogies that they have here, but we have some countries have a higher capacity to drive fast. Technology and productivity changes could be your gas mileage, a new engine. That all increases your long-run aggregate supply. So the government, a lot of times, has different mechanisms to speed up and slow down the economy by using fiscal and monetary policy. All right. So the role of consumers in the economy. Now remember that C is the most important part of real GDP. So consumption is going to lead our gross domestic product. And if consumers can spend a certain amount, and the more that they can spend, more disposable income that they can spend, the higher our GDP will be. So regardless of their income, they're going to spend a certain amount, all consumers, all right, on things like, food, water, clothing, the necessities. No matter what, whether your income goes up or your income goes down, you're going to spend that amount, okay? And we call this autonomous consumption, right? Consumer spending is made up of autonomous consumption and disposable income. So after your autonomous consumption and after taxes, you have a certain amount of money that you can do stuff with, right? You could buy, you could purchase things, you could save it. It depends on what you want to do and where you are in your life at that certain part of time, or where you are in your life right now. So if incomes are less than autonomous spending, then there is dis-savings or negative savings. But what if incomes fall and people stop buying things? Okay, who often steps in, right? The answer to that is a lot of times it will be the government. Okay, and the government has toolboxes that it uses. One is Congress, and we call that fiscal policy. So this is actions taken by Congress, them actually debating bills and putting out a spending bill that will go directly to the people. This morning, one of the things that they're talking about is sending a check from anywhere between $1,000 to $1,200 per adult and about $500 per child, just given to people. And we'll explain later how that will impact the economy. Monetary policy, we're not going to talk about this unit, but it's really our banking system led by our Federal Reserve. They have ways to put money and take money out of the economy through different devices. Okay, but we're just going to focus on fiscal policy today. Right? A couple videos. Make sure you really know and get a good grasp on what fiscal policy is. Then, when you think of fiscal policy, it's government action. Okay, and government increases in spending. The first thing is one thing to understand is that there's 2 types of fiscal policy. We have discretionary and non-discretionary. So Congress discretionary is the stuff that they actually can debate. So Congress creates a bill designed to change aggregate demand through government spending and taxation. One problem is the lag time. Okay, there's a couple of problems, mainly just with politicians. Okay, they disagree about everything, and it takes them a long time to do stuff, so it's not super effective, especially when things come about right away. So, for example, everybody knew that we need a stimulus package during the COVID-19 crisis. But still, it didn't happen overnight. It took a couple of days and a couple of meetings, but there's a little bit of a lag time. Non-discretionary is what we call our automatic stabilizers. These are payments are permanent things that are put in. They're payments that go out to people if they lose their jobs to keep aggregate demand going. It also will tax you more the more money you make. So if we're increasing our wealth, we're actually going to be paying more in taxes. And if we decrease our wealth, there's a certain amount of money that will go out to people to keep aggregate demand afloat. So GDP goes down, government spending will automatically increase, and taxes will automatically fall. So our income tax, okay, we have a progressive income tax system. That's one way that we have a automatic stabilizer. Okay, so this is the confusing thing about fiscal policy, and this is why it's somewhat ineffective. All right, first off is contractionary fiscal policy. This is the break. If the economy is too hot, these are the things that the government will do. Now, notice if you can see anything wrong with this, right? So laws that reduce inflation, decrease GDP, and close the inflationary gap. All right, to try to deal with inflation with an economy that's too hot, here's what they can do. Decrease government spending and increase taxes. Now, I hate to say this to you, but there are certainly politicians that like to decrease government spending, and there are certainly politicians that are willing to increase taxes, but there's not a politician that will do both. All right, imagine a politician going out and saying, hey, I want to become president and I'm going to increase your taxes and cut your spending. You're not going to win, right? A combination of two is the contractionary policy. This is probably where you see our politicians. Expansionary fiscal policy are laws to reduce the unemployment and increase GDP. Is they increase government spending, so more goods and services to people, from the government, and decrease taxes. All right, if you do this expansionary policy, you're probably going to get what is called deficit spending. And if you want to go online right now and look at what our debt is, it's in the trillions and trillions of dollars. Since I started teaching, I think it's almost tripled, if not quadrupled by now. So combinations of the two is a lot of times what we see. Okay, and it's certainly what we're seeing during this COVID-19 outbreak. All right, so a couple things, and I'll let you sort of pause, and I'll kind of get through this. But the question always will be, and the question that you'll have is the math around this. And remember that there is a spending multiplier. So Congress uses discretionary fiscal policy to manipulate the following economy. So you see we're in a recessionary gap. Okay, the question is, what type of gap? We know that it's a recessionary gap. We're going to need expansionary fiscal policy. There are two options that we can fix the gap. We could increase spending, okay, or decrease taxes. All right, and number 4 says, what is the least amount of initial government spending to close the gap? Now, the key thing up there is that our MPC is 0.8. All right, so take a second, do the math. What is it? All right, if you said 500 billion, you'd be wrong. Okay, the reason you're wrong is because we have a spending multiplier. If we did 500 billion, all right, that's going to increase more in throughout our economy. So our MPC is 0.8, our MPS is going to be 0.2, all right, for a spending multiplier of 5. Remember, 1 over 0.2, okay? So what we really need is the 500 billion divided by 5, okay? That's our spending multiplier, which would be 100 billion, okay? Let's go to the next one. That would increase it to that point. So a lot of times you'll get on the test, and I promise you this is a very common one. They'll say, here's a recessionary gap. How much do they need to increase the spending? This is a very common question that you'll see on the test. All right, now we have a gap. We call this an inflationary gap. We need contractionary fiscal policy, so we'll have to go negative. So we'll have to decrease that aggregate demand. So what are the two options to fix the gap? We could increase taxes, or we could decrease spending. So how much do we need to close the gap? The MPC is now 0.5, so your MPS is 0.5. All right, so 1 over 0.5 is 2, okay? And that would be our spending multiplier. So we see 20 billion, okay, is the difference. So 20 billion divided by 2 would be negative 10 billion. All right. Oop, I wrote over it. Here we go. Okay, now let's say we decided to cut taxes. Remember that your tax multiplier is going to be a little bit less. So two options the government has in this situation. We're in what we call a recessionary gap. All right, we can increase spending or decrease taxes. Right, but remember that spending multiplier is going to be a little bit less. So take a second. How much does the government spending to close the gap? Okay, our MPS is 0.2. All right. So take a second. That's how much the spending would be. But the gap, remember that in this situation, we did have a 5. So 1 over 0.2, a 5 spending multiplier. But for taxes, remember it's less, so 4. So we're going to have to cut a lot more taxes to be able to do that. So a $5 billion tax cut is what you would need to get to the long run aggregate supply and to shift that aggregate demand. Now remember, if we did nothing, aggregate supply would eventually shift. But sometimes you got to do something to get the economy going. All right. And that's it for part 1.